a teen librarian at the Central Branch over in Copley, and I'm excited to have you guys here today for our virtual author visit. You guys can drop questions that you have in the Q&A feature throughout. We're going to have a pretty big question and answer session at the end, but I have one of our teen volunteers here who's going to introduce our speaker to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Boston Public Library for our program today. My name is Kian, and I'm a teen volunteer for the library. I'm very excited to be introducing Brittney Morris for a virtual author visit. Ms. Morris is the author of best-selling novels Slay, The Cost of Knowing, and Marvel Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Wings of Fury. Her work was also included in the anthology Together Apart. She has also written for video games such as The Lost Legends of Redwall, and my personal favorite, Subnautica Below Zero. She has an economics degree from Boston University, and her works have been featured on many acclaimed book lists such as People Magazine and the New York Times. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Brittney Morris.
That was a great introduction. Thank you, Kian. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with everyone today. I'm really excited to talk about my writing, and there's a Q&A session at the end, so gear up your questions. Do we want them to put their Q&A questions in chat, or?
You guys can just use the little Q&A bubble to put them in, and then I can mark them off when I'm done answering them.
Cool. All right, do that. And I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end. So yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about my books, my writing books, writing video games, a little bit of the differences and the processes there. And if you have any questions, again, fire away. So I started off writing just anything that came into my head way long time ago when I was little. I knew I wanted to be an author when I was 9. And from there, I just kept writing novels. When I got to college, someone somewhere along the way convinced me to major in something that would pay the bills. Read was scientific, mathematical, analytical. And so I chose economics. Didn't enjoy hardly any of it. Just kind of got through it. Never stopped writing though. And when I went to see Black Panther, when I came out of the theater on opening night, I was really inspired to write a book that was inspired by Wakanda. I wanted to write a book that felt like I was playing a video game. And so the idea for Slay was born. For those who don't know, Slay is about a 17-year-old game developer named Kira Johnson who creates a Wakanda-inspired virtual reality video game called Slay. And she has to duel a racist troll using duel cards based on Black culture and Black history to keep control of it because he tries to take over. So that was my debut novel, came out in 2018. From there, I wrote my sophomore novel, The Cost of Knowing, which just came out this April. It's about two brothers. The older one can see into the future and the younger one can see into the past. And everything changes when the older brother sees a vision of his younger brother dying in the next few days. And so it becomes a race against time to get to the bottom of this 400-year-old family curse and examine being a Black boy with anxiety and being a Black boy with regrets and intergenerational trauma and figuring out what it means to be Black in the present. So that book was really close to my heart. I'm really excited that it's out in the world and I get to share with everyone. My writing process for writing novels is pretty straightforward and pretty linear. I come up with an idea, I send it to my agent, she gives a thumbs up, hopefully. We then send that to my editor. My editor eventually gives a thumbs up, maybe after a couple rounds of revising the idea. And then I get to work writing. And then it's basically a back and forth between me and my editor, polishing the book, making it the best possible thing it can be before it goes to print. With writing video games, the process can look quite different. So with writing Redwall, they told me that they wanted a 25,000 word video game. It would be a choose your own adventure game. So there would be a dialogue tree that I would be writing. I had to map out all of the different player choices and what the options would be and where that screen would take them, depending on what their their character selection would be. So that was my first window into what it felt like to write a story in which the player is also a storyteller. There are a lot of video games where when you write them, the player is telling their own story and making the game into what they want it to be about. And so you have to write with that in mind. So that was a really fun experience. And then with writing Subnautica Below Zero, it was completely different. There was an existing script, actually, from a previous writer, and they changed the main character so that she was a Black woman. And so they wanted us to reformat the script, rethink the dialogue, rethink all of these for entity in the game. There are a whole bunch of new plant species and animal species that had to be written about. And so that was a really unique experience, kind of revising existing script and then also writing new script that had to mesh together with the existing material pretty flawlessly. So that was a really fun project. And I'm a huge fan of Subnautica myself. So that was really rewarding. Another major difference, I guess, with just the process of getting feedback is when you're writing for a video game, there's a good chance you're going to be working with multiple teams. So when you're writing the story, you're not just thinking about what sounds good to the player. You're also thinking about what can feasibly be done by the art team, by the programmers, with the time constraints that you have and the resources that you have. With writing a novel, the sky is the limit. You can, create a character that has an unlimited budget to do whatever they want. With video games, there are lots of different constraints involved. And so all of those have to be considered when deciding what elements to put in the game, story-wise. So that was a new element that, it was really different from just the process of writing a novel. And then there are all of these different, just at their core, storytelling differences. So, for example, with a video game, I guess Subnautica would be a great example of this. In Subnautica, it's open world, so you can go up to a character, you can talk to them multiple times, you can collect different resources multiple times. There's a PDA scanner that will tell you what you just picked up or what you're about to use or what materials you need to fabricate different equipment, that kind of thing. There is a principle called diminishing empathy, where if you do the same action multiple times and the same thing happens every single time, the empathy that you have for whatever you're interacting with diminishes. So for example, let's take a fictional game. Let's say it's an open world RPG in like a Renaissance type arena. So let's say you walk up to a shopkeeper and they say, "Hi, welcome to my shop. Have a look around." And you have a look around and then you leave and then you come back. If that same shopkeeper says, "Hi, welcome to my shop. Have a look around," you start thinking of them not as human or not as a real person, which you know intuitively, but hear me out. The immersion is kind of lost, right? So you start to think of this person as an object that you're interacting with instead of a person in the game. So there are all of those considerations to be taken into consideration when writing for video games. Those are just some fundamental differences. I really enjoy both, honestly. Let me know if there are any questions specifically about writing for different mediums. I guess even writing for Marvel with Marvel Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Wings of Fury was quite a different experience because it's intellectual property. So it has an existing universe, it has existing characters with existing personalities, and writing for like intellectual property projects is also a completely different experience. So I'm happy to talk about that if anyone's interested.
Yeah, so you guys can drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A thing as we have them. What is your advice to young writers who want to publish a novel?
That's a great question. First of all, write quite a lot. Read quite a lot. Read things you like, read things you don't think you like. I guess surround yourself with people who will lift you up, like constructively. So people with criticisms that will help you, that you can trust, especially industry professionals that you can trust. I found my community through Twitter, book Twitter. There are some great people on there. Don't be afraid to reach out. I think there's a hashtag writing community. If you use that hashtag, you can just say hi to everyone and introduce yourself and let people know what you're about. And there's a lot of great networking to be done there. Yeah, that's my advice.
A couple Marvel questions here, so I'll combine them into one. First, did you approach Marvel with the idea that you were interested in writing for them, or did they reach out to you with this project? And then what was it like writing Miles Morales, like you said, this character that already exists, compared to getting to create your own characters?
Those are great questions. So Marvel actually reached out to my agent first. I got an email from her one day that said, hey, so Marvel needs a book in a month and a half. Can you do it? And I said, yes. So it was written quite fast. And then the experience writing Miles Morales was just surreal. I'll be honest, I was quite intimidated. I became a fan of Miles Morales when I saw Into the Spider-Verse, so I'm quite new to the character. Hadn't really read any of the comics at that point, and so I just knew that I wanted to do right by Marvel fans, because they're some of the most dedicated fans on the planet, and I wanted to make sure that I, handled the story appropriately. So there's a lot of chances that I took, a lot of exciting moments. I really wanted to write a book at that point that felt like watching a movie. The whole Saturday morning cartoons feeling, I wanted that in book form. So that was kind of what I went after. And I think it's a really fun story. So yeah. I came up with a lot of the plot. They came to me and they said, we know we want Miles in there. We know it's going to be a prequel to this new Spider-Man Miles Morales game for PS5. And it's going to be what happens after the first game. So they wanted a writer who was familiar with the first game, and I had seen 6 Let's Plays of that game, so I was pretty prepared in that respect, at least. So, yeah, it was a fun experience.
Going off of having seen 6 Let's Plays of that game, someone wants to know what your favorite video game is.
That's a great question. So I have a few favorites. Undertale is up there. Huge fan of Undertale. If you haven't played Undertale, I highly recommend it, even if you're not into video games. There's another game that came out in 2013 at this point, so it's kind of, getting up there. It's called Papo and Yo, and that game, there's a twist in that game that just changed how I see storytelling with video games. There are also, let me see, Papers, Please is another one that just completely blew my mind with the kinds of topics that video games can cover. And then finally, I guess Dance Dance Revolution counts as a video game. Yeah. I grew up with that, so I love DDR so much.
Nice. That's like my speed of video game, so I think it counts. How do you handle writing from a perspective that is not your own, such as in the Miles Morales book and Cost of Knowing from a male perspective?
That's a fantastic question. And honestly, as best as you can. And also listening to people who are of that background, who have feedback for you, especially in the early days, that information is golden. We had a Black male sensitivity reader take a look at the Cost of Knowing. There were a couple concerns in an early draft. And at that point I was like, you know what, just whatever you think, I'm here for it. I'll revise it. I'll listen. Let me know what I can do so that I'm writing a character that reflects the group as best as possible. So that's my advice. It's not easy though.
Another one about the writing process that I think probably also isn't easy. How did you keep track of the plot of Slay and also all the rules of the game while you were writing it? It seems like it's a lot to keep straight there.
That's a great question. So whenever I write a book, I start by outlining. I give myself 24 hours to outline because I'm an extremely anxious person and I will sit there and just spin and spin and spin about what should go in the book for months if I let myself. So I cap it at 24 hours. That can be spaced out over however much time, but I'll sit down and write or outline for 2 hours, and the next day maybe 4, and then so on and so on. 24 is the max. I keep it to a page, and I always start by listing my primary characters, my secondary characters, and my tertiary characters. And then I write a bulleted list of all of the chapters in the book. And each bullet can only take up 1 line. If it indents to the next one, it's too long, there's too much information, chapter's too big, next. And in that line, it has to contain the reason why the chapter is in there. So what has to happen for the chapter to stay in the book. And then at the end, the hook that keeps the reader turning to the next chapter. Then I take that paragraph and extend it into, I take that bulleted list and extend it into a single paragraph. That's my short synopsis. Then I take that paragraph and expand it into a page, which is my long synopsis. And after I'm done with all of that and send all of that to my agent, I am off to the races. And the goal is just to write as fast as humanly possible and stick with that outline. So with Slay, all I added to that was a list of card titles that I thought reflected my experience as a Black person pretty well, and the categorization. So whether it was a battle card, a defense card, or a hex card. And then from there, I mean, I would put the title of the card on the page and then go, okay, what's going to happen next? What does this card do? What would a twist out card do? What would it look like if I was fighting with a twist out? And so I just let the inspiration come to me as I wrote each card into the book. And I wrote the book so fast, the whole thing was pretty much a blur. The first draft of Slay was written in 11 days. So I had no time to really overthink anything.
Wow. Another Slay question. What was your favorite card that you created for the book?
Ooh. That one, Auntie's potato salad, was pretty funny. After my family read this book, I had people calling me up going, so who is this Auntie we all need to be worried about at the next reunion? So,
making sure it's not them.
Right.
Let's see. Another kind of general writing question. You talked about your advice for teens who are interested in writing books. Do you have any different advice if they were interested in writing for video games or getting involved in like the video game world?
Yeah. So getting into writing video games can be quite tricky. But there are a lot of like networking groups for video games, and especially like video game creators of color. They're on social media, they're on Discord. If you can reach out to any, connect with them, tweet at them, that's a great place to start. Having something already published is really helpful. So when I got into writing video games, Redwall was my first video game that I wrote. I had already published Slay, and I already had a 2-book deal. So I already had work published. If you can get to that point first, that's a great way to get in, to show that you can, write things that are publishable. And then I also had a background as a business analyst, which was a lot of working with teams, going back and forth between the people who were doing the technical work and then the parts of the business that wanted for lack of a better term, they wanted the prettier things put in. So, for example, when I was a BA, I would go to the marketing team and they would say, we want a green button on the website. And then I would go to the technical team and I'd figure out that we needed to ask, what color green? Does it have to match the company green? Why does it have to be a button? Can it be a window? Can it be, just all of these seemingly superfluous questions that really drill down what they want. So if you're used to working with multiple teams like that, that's another great benefit to have if you're going to be involved in any part of the video game making process. That's my advice, just off the top of my head.
I have a question based on that now. So since you have this background working in teams, if you could write a book with any other author, who would be like your dream author to do a collab project with?
Oh, man. Oh, there's so many. I know. Danielle Clayton is incredible. I love her so much. Angie Thomas is definitely up there. She's just a wonderful human being, in addition to her amazing writing. Roseanne Brown is also great. She's one of my best friends. She's wonderful. Those are the first three that come up in my head.
These are all good options.
Oh, Nick Stone. How could I forget Nick Stone?
Of course. Both of your books are a mix of different genres. How did you decide which genres you want to write in and include in your specific books?
That's a great question. I think when I come up with a story, I'm never really after like pinpointing a specific genre. I tend to see my experiences as a Black person in like kind of an abstract way. So with regard to The Cost of Knowing, talking about the experience of young Black men in America, it started, the idea for the being able to see into the future versus the past actually started with this character I couldn't get out of my head. It was this young Black guy, and of all things, he worked in a toothpaste factory. I don't know why. I told my agent that, and she said, I am so glad we've evolved past that idea. But I just couldn't get that idea out of my head. And so I knew he would be able to see into the future. He'd be able to see the future of each tube of toothpaste that came down the conveyor belt. And then I got the idea of putting in another character who can see into the past. And then they discover they have these juxtaposing powers. And then it clicked one day that as a Black person, I kind of feel like I already experienced that. You know, when I turn on the news, I see so much police brutality and violence against Black people, and, you know, so much talk about the school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration being the new slavery, and just all of these things with an implied you could be next under the right circumstances. And then every time, you know, Black History Month rolls around, we talk about so much trauma in Black history. We talk about the civil rights movement and slavery and just so many things that are really important to remember and continue to talk about and apply to our lives now, but that also come with a major emotional tax. And so I kind of feel like I'm already sandwiched between looking into the future all the time and looking into the past all the time. And so it just seemed like a natural progression to make that literal on the page with The Cost of Knowing.
I think this kind of feeds off of that answer. Alex's anxiety and The Cost of Knowing comes through really strongly, and it is a pretty heavy book overall. How do you write about experiences like that accurately without letting it like totally destroy your own mental health?
That is a great question. And I wish I had a better answer. Basically, when I was writing this book, I abandoned all sense of self-preservation and just went deep into like all of my feelings. And I tell people now, like when I was writing this book, my husband and I were starting a family. And then after the book was drafted, I went back and edited while I was pregnant, found out I was having a boy. So I kind of like stepped into this world of, I'm not just writing a Black male character who I don't know, who's going through all of this stuff. I'm writing about this experience that my son could conceivably have one day. And I don't know if I could have, if I right now could write the and face and how his little smile and, you know, despite what he's going to see in the world. So it was quite a lot to go through. And it does talk about a lot of heavy topics. Being able to write the anxiety part authentically was actually pretty easy. I have generalized anxiety myself. So my brain is constantly jumping back and forth into what if anything goes wrong? What if I'm not prepared? What if I haven't thought of everything? What if these people think this about me, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a lot to go through, but I'm really proud of it. So great question.
We have someone who says they really relate to your experience of being pressured to focus on something marketable in school instead of focusing on a passion, but that isn't seen as like profitable. How did you overcome that pressure to go do the writing thing and go after your dream?
That's a great question. So I kind of split my energy down the middle. So I majored in economics, but I didn't put all of my effort into it. My energy into my books. I started querying in college. I started the Boston University Creative Writing Club when I found out there wasn't one. Did NaNoWriMo every year. So I kind of made sure to, focus on both and never let go of that. And it's so easy to do. I mean, even after I graduated and I had, these corporate jobs where I had a commute in the morning and then it was 8 hours of work and then a commute in the afternoon. Like, who wants to get home and turn on their brain again, right? Like, it's not an easy thing to do, but it paid off in the end. I wouldn't choose to do anything else. So good luck.
Yeah. You included a lot of important Black American historical figures in Slay, both past and present. Was there anyone that you learned anything new about while you were creating their cards?
There was. There's actually an arena called Fairbanks Arena in the Tundra region. And I, at first, when I named it Fairbanks, I was just coming up with the name that popped into my head first. And then I looked up Black icons under Fairbanks and realized the first professional Black figure skater was a person by the name of Mabel Fairbanks. And I was like, the stars just aligned. This is absolutely perfect. While I was drafting Slay with Fairbanks and putting in Fairbanks Arena for her. So
nice. Is there, if you could like go back and add any cards, is there anyone that didn't have a card that you think you would like to give them a card?
Well, I was going to say Oprah, but I think Oprah's actually in there somewhere. Marsai Martin, I think, should have a card. Yeah, she should definitely have a card. She's incredible. Lizzo could have a card. I'd love that. Yeah.
Nice. We have a couple questions about how did you find your agent? How did you get a publisher interested in Slay?
That's a great question. So the reason why I wrote Slay so fast is because I was trying to finish the manuscript in time for Pit Mad, which is a Twitter pitch contest where you can pitch your book on a specific day of the year when they host the contest, and you can get your work out in front of many, many agents all at once. It's a great resource. I highly recommend you look it up if you're trying to get traditionally published. And so I did that. The pitch for Slay got a ton of attention. I think I had like 150 likes from different agents. So from there, I queried 42 of them. Well, I shouldn't say that. I queried 42 agents total. Not all of them were agents who liked my tweet, but I just said, let me just shoot for the stars here and add, all of these dream agents. And one of my dream agents was Teresa Robinson, who is now my agent. I got 8 agents offering on representation for Slay. And Teresa I had one conversation with her and she just got the story. She knew where I wanted to go with my career. She had experience as an editor already at Scholastic, so I knew she had, great experience talking to editors and knew what they were looking for and all of that. So I went with Teresa and haven't regretted it since. Once we polished Slay to be the best it could be, we went wide and sent it to a whole bunch of editors that she thought would be interested. We had an 8-house auction, so 8 different publishing houses wanted to buy the rights to Slay, and we went with Jen at Simon & Schuster, and she was absolutely wonderful. She's now with HarperCollins, and I miss her dearly, but we had a great time working on Slay and a great time working on The Cost of Knowing. So that's my publishing story.
Can you tell them how long it took from kind of the start of that process to the book actually being on shelves?
Yeah. So Slay, the first draft of Slay was written in 11 days. I queried on day 12. Please do not do that. Take the time to revise your book before you send it out to agents. I got extremely lucky, and that is my only explanation for why that worked. After I got my agent, which took a week and a half, I think, my agent and I looked at it for about a month. Then we went on Sub, which is where you send your book out to editors. I was on Sub for a day before we got a yes back, which is also unheard of. It can take months for that to happen. Then from there, once we had signed a contract with Jen, it took 8 months of revising. So generally, the faster you draft, the longer you spend in editing. Funny how that works. And then once we were done, I think I want to say it was almost a year before release day for Slay.
Let's see. Another writing question. Did you kind of write out the full plot of The Cost of Knowing and then go back in and add the visions, or did you write the visions and then kind of plot it out based on those?
That's a great question. I kind of did both at the same time. I started writing the story, and then every time Alex touches something, he has a vision. So every time he would touch something, I would have to write about another vision that he was having. So yeah, they just kind of went hand in hand.
It seems, of reading it, I was like, that would be so stressful. Like
Having the power.
Feel it. Yeah.
I would not want that power.
Would you consider making either of the books into movies?
I would, yeah. TV rights for Slay have actually been sold. So crossing my fingers that comes to fruition. Can't talk about the company that bought it just yet. There's no official announcement, but yeah, rights for Slay have been sold. Rights for The Cost of Knowing have not sold yet. So maybe one day.
Do you have any dream castings for any character in either book?
For Kira, I mean, Marcy Martin is up there. For Alex, I'm not quite sure. I don't really think so. I haven't really thought about it.
I mean, it just came out. You've got time to think about it.
True.
We've got a question about the big twist in Slay, where Kira's pretty sure she knows who the troll is, and the reader kind of probably thinks the same thing, but it ends up being someone unexpected. How did you kind of come up with that twist and write it to make it believable?
That's a great question. So I think with this particular book and this particular twist, it was written to be believable, because up until the moment when Kira has just finished the duel and is asking, "Who are you?" I thought it was who she thought it was. And then it clicked in my head, because I got to that point and I said, okay, I can't just, have it be who the reader thinks it is. Like, where's the fun in that? Like, I want to give my readers more respect than that. And so it clicked in my head who it could be. And I remember I must have been, I want to say 9 or 10 days into this, wild drafting adventure. And I had told my husband, like, on day one, I was like, so I have a project that just popped up. I'm going to be gone for the next 11 days. You probably won't see me. I'm going to be in the room. I might not sleep. I might not eat. Here we go. Bye. And so I came running into the kitchen on day like 9 or 10. And I said, and then named who it was going to be. And he has no idea who these characters are. He has no idea what this book is about. He's like, I'm going to make you some food and you're going to lie down for 10 minutes. I was super, super excited that I had figured out who it was. So that's why it feels so believable. Because I didn't even see it coming. And then it all just locked into place, and it just made so much sense for it to be who it was. So.
Did you have to go back and do any rewriting to set it up a little bit?
Yep. I had to add in a few clues toward the beginning.
Nice. I think that's like one of the hardest things to do in writing, is to put enough clues that it's not totally out of the blue, but not so many that anyone who's read like 5 books ever can automatically call out what's happening. So
yeah,
good work.
I love a good twist.
We've got another one just about Boston. You went to BU. Do you have any favorite places in Boston?
Oh, nice. Yeah. So my sister actually still lives there, with my nephew and niece. So let me see. There was a restaurant in Cambridge called Tory Row, and I think it's gone now. But that was a great spot. Noodle Street was also a classic. I would go there all the time with my friends. Raising Cane's. Why are these all food places?
Those are the most important places.
Yeah. I mean, Boston Public Library, of course, Prudential Center, all of Newbury Street, pretty much. I used to work over there. Yeah, those are all great spots.
Nice. How do you feel about writers who change perspective in a book? So maybe changing the perspective that they're writing from? Is that a trope that you like in books or not?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to assume that by changing perspective, you mean changing point of view. So changing the main character who's talking, not changing tense. Just in general, I can't stand it when the tense changes. I'm like, wait, what happened? N.K. Jemisin is the exception. So with changing point of view, I love it, frankly. I especially love it when the voice changes so much that it doesn't even sound like the same writer. That's really, really difficult to do. So I have immense respect for writers who can do that.
Yeah. You guys can keep dropping your questions in the chat, but I can ask some while you guys think of some more. I was wondering if we got another one. Have you always been a big gamer, or was Slay and kind of writing for games your intro into gaming?
That's a great question. I've always been really into video games. I didn't take in a whole lot of video game content until I got to college. I think we got our first console. It was a Nintendo GameCube, and Super Mario Sunshine came free with it. And so that was my first introduction to story-based games where I was playing a story. Before that, it was just Duck Hunt and Mario Party 2. So still fun, but not quite a story. And then when I got to college, I was flat broke, couldn't afford a console, couldn't afford PC games. And so I started watching Let's Plays, and at the time I was watching PewDiePie, before the PewDiePie debacle happened. I was watching Markiplier, Morphar. I was watching Jacksepticeye, who is my favorite Let's Player of all time. Because of his content, I've taken in thousands of video games, stories from thousands of video games. So yeah, that was really when my intake blew up. And then now part of my writing process is I always have Microsoft Word on one side, and I always have a Let's Play going on the other side. So right now I'm writing The Jump, and I'm watching Markiplier play Papers, Please, and Jacksepticeye watch Resident Evil 8. So.
That kind of goes off. I was going to ask, were there specific physical games, video games that inspired Slay and the creation of that game?
So Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to say Yu-Gi-Oh! Inspired it. However, I've never seen Yu-Gi-Oh! I just have a basic understanding of how it works. People have asked if Magic the Gathering inspired it. Never played Magic the Gathering. It was really inspired after I went and saw Black Panther, and there was the duel scene with all of the different cultures of people, all the way up the mountain. That moment, I think, inspired the duels in Slay. And the cards just made a whole lot of sense. It clicked one moment as I was outlining the story that a deck of cards would make a lot of sense because Blackness is such a hugely wide and kaleidoscopic experience. If there was a deck of cards to sum up Blackness as an experience, maybe all of the cards don't relate to you, but the deck is big enough that at least one does. There is space for you as a Black person. You are Black enough, whatever your experience is, however many cards you can relate to, and all of that. So the cards just made it a lot of sense when I was adding that to the dual element.
Yeah, I know she talks about that some in the book, there being different cards based on things that are African experiences, not necessarily African American experiences, and people not knowing what those cards were when they first encountered them. Did you have to do research into some of those cards, or were you pulling from things you already knew?
I did, yeah. There was a lot of quick Googling that happened at first, and then in later editing rounds, I went back and made sure that I got those experiences right. So yeah, there's a lot of research that went into that.
And then also, I think kind of going along with that, it seems like a big theme of Slay is kind of challenging this idea, like you kind of mentioned, of not being Black enough, or there being one way to be Black and being a Black nerd. Can you talk a little bit just about why that was so important for you to talk about, and if there were any sort of specific, I don't know, things that you wanted to tear down as you were writing that?
Absolutely. So guess I better back up all the way to my childhood for this answer. I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, where nothing happens except football and farming. So, and I was, one of the only Black kids in most of the town, really, but especially at my school. And so all of my classmates kind of expected me to be the resident expert on the Black experience, as if there is one kind of Black experience. They expected me to eat the right foods and know the right music and be able to explain the scientific breakdown of how my hair works and all of these things that I had no idea. And I was like, I grew up most of my childhood wondering, like, am I Black enough? Like, I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer these questions. What's wrong with me? Having no idea that was an unrealistic expectation for them to have. And so, growing up, like, I relaxed my hair when I was a kid. I wanted straight hair more than anything else in the world. And so when I went natural after I graduated college, I realized just how much of a political statement it was to wear my hair like this. And, I started really interrogating what my experiences as a Black woman were and what I wanted to be as a strong Black woman. And I think going into the movie theater was the first time I walked into a room full of Black people and I allowed myself to feel like unconditional love and acceptance. Like it was such a surreal experience being able to walk in and cross my arms and say Wakanda forever. And suddenly I was in, and people in there just kind of looked at me like, welcome home. And I was like, yes. As soon as I left the theater, I said, I've got to go back. Yeah. So that was why writing this book was so much of it was a borderline spiritual experience. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot that I wanted to talk about with, the Black experience being so different for everyone, especially for Cicada's perspective, because she's half Black and half white. And I knew there would be a lot of questions there about, am I Black enough to play? Am I allowed to play? We talk about the 1 drop rule in the book. We talk about passing the paper bag test. We talk about everything in Slay. And my son is actually half white himself. So I knew those would be questions that he would want answered to when he gets older. And I'm actually really excited for him to read the book and see what he thinks about it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to just the power of media and representation, because it feels like so many of the author events we've hosted at BPL this past year, Shuri in particular, but just seeing Black Panther and seeing Shuri has come up as something that inspired many different writers to write projects, which is really cool.
Yeah.
We've got more Marvel questions. What was it like writing about Miles Morales? And maybe also talk about you wrote it really quickly. How did you get in all the research and background information that you needed? Were you given cheat sheets? Did you have to kind of just consume all that material and not sleep?
That's a great question. Being given the Miles Morales universe to play with for a little while was quite intimidating. I knew I wanted to do it right, and I knew I wanted to have fun with it, and I knew I wanted to take risks and also still respect the original universe. So it was quite a balancing act. My research for the story involved a few calls with Insomniac Games about the first game, about what was going to happen in the second game, because I had no idea. That was actually back when the game hadn't been announced yet. So there was no information to the public about what this game was going to be about. Took extensive notes on what they told me. I rewatched Jacksepticeye's playthrough of Spider-Man for PS4. Took notes on that. I was given artwork for the second game, which was really, really cool. Got to see a lot of the spider suits, a lot of the character mock-ups. So kind of had, visual references for what was going to go in the book. And then I was given copies of the comic strips, a lot of the different comic editions. So yeah, I was given a lot of material. They were really generous with that.
In terms of Peter plays into it a little bit. He's definitely a side character, but he's there for a character like that where there's been so many different characterizations of what he's like. Did that give you more freedom, or was it the same kind of this is how Peter is in the game and right now, so this is what you have to stick to?
I mean, it gave me a whole lot of freedom. I knew that since this game would be a sequel and a prequel to two different video games, I wanted to get the tone of that particular Peter into this game, or into this book. And I knew in that game, Peter was like, he was, youthful and playful, and just there's a lot of playful sarcasm in there. There's even some like breaking the fourth wall. So I got to play around in all those different ways. So even though Spider-Verse is like possibly one of my favorite it's definitely one of my favorite Marvel movies. I knew that Peter in his 40s, like just recovering from life in general, was not quite the direction we wanted to go with this. So. Yeah.
And you also, I was wondering when I was reading it, because I know working with like the big corporations, sometimes it can be harder to push boundaries. But Peter definitely has some moments where he's kind of like trying his best, but isn't really understanding how being a Black Spider-Man is in a lot of ways very different from his own experience. Did you have to push at all to get any of those things in, or were they pretty accepting of you being real?
I was surprised when that was just accepted at face value.
Nice.
There was one moment where so Miles is the hero of the story, and something happens to him that is very outside of the realm of what should happen to a hero in a Marvel piece of media. So that was the only moment where they were like, we're not comfortable with this. But aside from that, they let me run wild with the story. So it was great.
We've got some general writing questions here. Does writing tend to energize you, or do you find that it kind of exhausts you, or a mix of both?
Oh, it's definitely a mix of both. I don't think I ever feel as alive as when I'm like, I've gotten a good night's sleep and I'm at a coffee shop at 6 a.m. and the sun is coming up and I've got my laptop in front of me and my coffee and my snack. And I'm just in the middle of drafting a really exciting scene. Like my heart starts pounding. I can't stop smiling. It's what I was meant to do. And then after I finish a book, I'm usually just like, all right, it's time to hibernate for a couple months. So it's a little of both, honestly.
Yeah. And what has it been like writing, promoting a book, being a new mom, all in this like weird new virtual sphere? Has that affected those levels of energy and everything in unexpected ways?
I wouldn't say in unexpected ways, because since I'm such an anxious person, I plan way too much for the worst case scenario. So yeah, it's been hectic for sure. And it's been tougher to find spare time for things, just hobbies and everything. But I will say I'm in an extremely lucky and privileged situation where my husband is a stay-at-home parent. So, I know my child is taken care of, no matter how much work gets piled on. And I also tend to, like, after I had the baby, I really started trimming down what hours I would check my email. Before I would just have my email open and just check email all day. And now it's like we have a window at the beginning of the day. So just having a tighter command of my time has really, really helped. So.
That's a good tip for teens. Set your boundaries, have boundaries for yourself, and makes your life a lot better.
Yep. And don't be afraid to say no to things. You don't have to say yes to everything.
Mm-hmm. Here's another teen advice question. If you had to do something differently as a teenager or young adult to become a better writer as an adult, what types of things do you wish you'd done more of, or would you have done differently?
I would have read more. I was a decent writer in college because I wrote so much, but I really didn't read quite like at all really for pleasure until 2017, when I was stuck in a bookstore waiting for my flight out of New Orleans and picked up a copy of The Hate You Give because I saw a girl on the front who looked like me and realized this is what the young people are reading now. And it looks totally different from when I was younger. And I just fell in love with reading all over again. So if I could do anything different, I would read as a teenager, and I would continue to read through college, even though there's already a ton of reading in college and it's difficult. It's so important if you're going to be a writer. I thought I really was under the impression that I was going to be the only writer who just didn't read, and that's just not, it's not a thing.
Do you feel like The Hate You Give was the first time that you remember really like seeing yourself represented on a book, or were there other moments in young adult fiction that kind of stick out to you for that?
I think the very first time when I saw myself in a book was when I read Dave at Night by Gail Carson Levine. Mm-hmm. I was in the 3rd grade, and I'll never forget realizing that the love interest was a Black girl at a jazz club. And like, it was the first time where I saw myself as a person to be desired in a book. And that was just a mind-blowing experience. And then with The Hate You Give, that was the first time where I saw my concerns written in a book. Like one of my deepest fears is like having a violent act committed against me in public. And so The Hate You Give was the first time where I was like, oh my God, people are actually talking about this now in literature, and this is being taught in schools and whatnot. So yeah, both of those were incredible experiences.
I know a lot of people hate this question because it puts you on the spot. And I know I get really anxious and put on the spot when I'm asked it. But I always have to ask, are there any YA books that have just come out or are coming out soon that you're really excited for or have been loving that you would recommend to our teens?
Yeah.
Maybe by some of your friends that you mentioned.
Absolutely. So I think it's been a year now since I read A Song of Raids and Ruin by Roseanne Brown, and that book it's my favorite fantasy of all time. So definitely, if you're a person, if you exist, read that book. And then I'm reading The Upper World by Femi Fadigba right now, and it's also amazing. Teenagers, math, time travel, like I'm in. The Marvelous by Claire Kahn is also a really good one. I read that one a few months ago. I believe it comes out in September.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Any of those
are
every time.
It's
for those who don't know, it's basically Wonka and the Chocolate Factory meets Snapchat. So
yes, it looks very good. How do you beat writer's block, and what's your advice to teen writers with this problem? Another one that I know can be tough to answer.
That's a fantastic question. My first line of defense is a quote from a friend of mine. She's a YouTuber. Her name is Haiying Yang. And I told her, it was one day I was like, I just really don't feel like writing. I don't know what I'm going to do. This deadline's coming up. And she's not a writer herself, but she looked me in the eye and said, you should treat yourself with more respect. You should, what did she say? She said, you should have a higher opinion of yourself. She said, stop thinking that you need motivation to do hard things. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. And so I just kind of sat down and did it. However, that's not always realistic advice. Sometimes it's just not a thing you can do. So when that happens, as a last resort, I will open up a file folder that I keep of all of my snippets of writing that I need to stop talking with my hands. There's a lot of reflecting going on. I'm sorry. I will open up my file folder with all of the snippets of writing that I've had to take out of my stories that really, really excited me. And I'll just read through all of that. And it almost always gets the creative juices going. I almost always feel inspired to open up the blank page again and get started. So those are my 2 pieces of advice.
That's a good way to deal with the frustration of having to take things out that you really loved, is kind of putting them away to save them for later.
Yep. That's probably my least favorite part of the writing process, is having to cut things out that I was excited about.
Do you find that you usually are overwriting and then having to cut it down instead of the other way around, or does it kind of depend on the project?
It depends. With Slay, the first draft was only 53,000 words, because to be a YA novel, you just have to hit 50,000. So I was like, if I could just get over that amount, it's a queryable book. Naive 2018 me, or 2017 me. With The Cost of Knowing, I think, oh, by the way, Slay, I think, is 85,000 words now in final form. So there was a lot of adding done to it. With The Cost of Knowing, I think we only added 15,000. So I guess to answer your question, I've underwritten, and we've added things in editing.
Going back to the cost of knowing, not to like kind of end things on a downer here as we get to the end. So I'll try to ask some more upbeat questions after this, but what was the hardest scene for you to write in The Cost of Knowing? I feel like this might be a spoiler, so maybe close your ears for a minute if you don't want to hear spoilers about The Cost of Knowing.
Actually, I don't think this scene is a spoiler. Necessarily, but it does deal with, this is a trigger warning, this scene deals with self-harm, the scene deals with blood, the scene deals with lots of difficult things. So if feel free to mute yourself. I'll hold up my hand while I'm talking about it and then lower my hand once I'm done talking about it. There's a scene in which Alex is very desperate to get rid of his ability to see the future with everything he touches. And the palm side of his hand is the spot on his hand that lets him see the future. And so he takes desperate measures one day and goes into the kitchen, gets a knife, and attempts to remove the skin from his thumb to see if that will make it so that he can't see the future if he touches his hand there. It does not work. It's extremely devastating. There's a lot of bloody paper towels involved. And as I was writing this scene, I just knew that this scene was going to have to come with a massive warning label because it's difficult to read. So
yeah,
that was probably one of the hardest scenes I've ever written in anything I've ever written. So
yeah,
well done.
That was definitely like a powerful but tough scene. Kind of going off of that question, sort of, I think in the acknowledgments, the afterword, at some point late in the book, you talked about how the idea had originally come to you as more of just like the sci-fi magic aspect of it, and it didn't initially start out as being sort of serious and dealing with all of this generational trauma and what it means to be a Black boy in America, but you realized that that was kind of the story that you had to write. If you went back to that original idea, do you think you would write continuations of Alex's adventures, or would you just kind of do a total reboot?
That's a great question. I think I would write a completely different story. I think it's probably going to sound weird, but I think Alex has been through enough.
I mean, true.
After writing all of that, I kind of feel like, okay, I need to leave him alone. Just let him live his life. I think I would write a completely different story with a completely different character. And I do want to write something like soft and romantic and happy later down the line. So just not sure when. Maybe even in video game form. Who knows? I've been thinking about making my own video games one day.
Ooh, so we'll very see. Cool. Well, I have time for a couple more. I want to ask real quick off of that because I have to. If you could make Slay an actual game, would that be like the dream?
That would be so much fun. And I actually recently wrote a VR game. It was my first VR game with Phenomena Games. It's not Slay, by the way. But now that I have experience writing a VR game, I think it would be a ton of fun. I would want an existing developer to buy the rights to it and then bring me on as a writer. That would be, the dream. But we'll see. So.
Fingers crossed. One last question in the chat here, and then I will wrap things up with my favorite end question. So we have one more. If you weren't a writer, what do you think you would do for work? Would you go back to what you had been doing, or do you think you would have ended up somewhere different?
Oh, that's a great question. That's such a hard question too, because even when I'm not writing, I'm thinking about writing. I definitely think I'd still be a storyteller in some capacity. Just not sure what. I mean, my previous job was as a business analyst, so I guess I would still be doing that if I wasn't published. But
and then kind of to wrap things up, I'll ask one last question, but also before we go, we have another librarian who is running an event about cool summer reading books that is run by teens. If any of you want to hop over to that, I think Michelle, my colleague, is going to pop the link in the chat. That starts at 4. But one last question for you, Brittney. Thank you for joining us. This has been great. Can you tell everyone a little bit maybe about what you're working on now or what they can expect from you next?
I'd love to. Yeah. So my next book coming out is called The Jump. It comes out in 2023. I had to remember that. So there's a bit of a wait on it, but if all goes well, it'll be worth it. It is about 4 Seattle teens who they run a cryptology forum, and they take on a cryptology puzzle, which is a digital scavenger hunt, basically with digital clues, posted by a reclusive vigilante, like social justice vigilante group called The Order, that promises the teens high-tech resources and political influence should they win. And they plan to use those resources to take down an oil refinery going up in their neighborhood. So it's really, really a lot of, I'm having so much fun writing this. I can't believe I get paid to do this, frankly. It so far has a grocery store heist and a car chase and a sewer escape. So it's got a little bit of everything. My goal with this one is to write the most action-packed book I've ever written. So we'll see how it goes.
Awesome.
I'm really excited to share it with everyone. And thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah.
I'm having a ton of fun.
Thank you for joining us. Thank all of you guys for joining us. You can get both of Brittney's books and the Miles Morales book all from bpl.org. You can get them digitally or physically. So check those out if you hadn't. And everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you, everyone.